Continuation, the winter of awakening. The highway stretched endlessly before Margaret, a ribbon of pale gray cutting through the snow-dusted Pennsylvania countryside. The car heater hummed softly, and for the first time in years, she felt the quiet weight of her own choices. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, calls from Mom, Dad, and Lisa, but she ignored them, her trembling hands gripping the steering wheel. The digital clock blinked 10:47 a.m. Somewhere between the frozen miles, a deep calm began to settle over her, a silence that wasn't emptiness, but release. By evening, Margaret checked into a small boutique hotel on the outskirts of Philadelphia. The room was simple but clean, with white walls and a faint scent of lavender from the fresh linens. As she set her suitcase down, a realization hit her. She had no one expecting dinner, no one depending on her to fix, clean, or comfort. For the first time in decades, the silence in the room belonged only to her. She turned on the lamp by the bedside and sat with a notebook. Its pages, once filled with work notes and grocery lists, now waited like blank territory, an uncharted map of her own life. Her hand trembled as she wrote, "Who am I when I'm not needed?" Tears blurred the words. For so long, her worth had been measured by service, by how efficiently she could meet everyone else's needs. That night, Margaret walked through the quiet streets dusted in snow. The air was cold, her breath visible like fleeting clouds. She passed cafes still glowing with Christmas lights, couples laughing over hot chocolate, and a bookstore window displaying titles about self-discovery. She stopped in front of one. The cover read, "Reclaiming Yourself." She went inside, bought it without hesitation, and spent hours in her hotel room reading under the dim light, her eyes widening as she saw pieces of herself reflected in every page. Days of solitude and reflection. The following days passed in a strange, peaceful rhythm. Margaret took slow mornings, savoring her coffee by the window as the city woke below. She visited museums, wrote in her journal, and even attended a watercolor class she stumbled upon near Rittenhouse Square. Each brushstroke felt liberating, soft lines of blue and amber, like a quiet rebellion against the invisible cage she'd lived in for years. One evening, while sketching a winter scene by the hotel window, her phone buzzed again. This time, she answered. "Margaret, please come home." Her mother's voice pleaded, shaky and uncertain. "We're worried sick. You didn't even say goodbye." Margaret took a deep breath, her voice calm but steady. "It's about the party, isn't it? You want me back to help." There was a pause. Then Eleanor sighed. "We need you, Maggie. Nothing feels right without you." Margaret's chest tightened, torn between guilt and defiance. "When I disappeared, was your first concern me or the housework?" Her mother fell silent. Then her father's voice came on the line, gruff but softening. "Maggie, just come home. We'll talk when you're here." Margaret closed her eyes. "Let me think about it," she said gently. "I'll give you an answer tomorrow." That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, she realized she didn't have to rush to fix things. She could choose. In the morning, she met Sarah Fisher, the hotel's cafe owner, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a quiet strength. Their small talk turned into conversation about burnout, family, and boundaries. Sarah listened without judgment. "Sometimes," Sarah said softly, "the hardest part of loving others is learning to love yourself first. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's sacred." Those words stayed with Margaret all day. By evening, she opened her laptop and began typing a letter, calm, clear, and deliberate. The letter. "Dear Mom and Dad. For a long time, I've found joy in supporting our family, but this Christmas made me realize something. I have been valued for my usefulness, not for who I am. I'm willing to return home and help prepare for New Year's, but only under new terms. I am not a maid. I wish to be treated equally as your daughter. Household responsibilities must be shared by all family members. My time and choices deserve the same respect as Lisa's. If these terms are not acceptable, I'll move forward on my own. With love, Margaret." She hit send, her hands trembling slightly. It was more than just an email, it was a declaration of self-worth. The reply arrived within an hour. "Maggie, please come home. We accept any conditions. The house isn't the same without you." Margaret smiled faintly. The urgency in their words revealed more fear of losing her than true understanding, but still, it was a start. A return with conditions. When Margaret stood once again before her family's door, she hesitated. The house looked the same, the snow-dusted roof, the faint glow from the living room window, but she was no longer the same woman who had walked out days ago. Inside, the house was in disarray. Unwashed dishes, fallen decorations, and half-burnt candles scattered the once perfect space. Maggie, Eleanor rushed from the kitchen, trying to embrace her, but Margaret stepped back slightly. Mom, Dad, we need to talk. The firmness in her tone made both parents exchange startled glances. They sat around the dining table. Margaret placed her printed email on the table. These aren't just words, they're my boundaries. Her mother looked flustered. We were just worried. Margaret interrupted softly. Your first messages weren't about me. They were about the house. About chores. That hurt. Silence. Even Walter couldn't find words. For 38 years, Margaret continued, I've been reliable. But reliability isn't love, it's expectation. The Christmas present showed that. Her voice broke slightly. Lisa got recognition. I got responsibility. Is that my worth? Her parents looked stricken. Walter finally sighed, rubbing his temples. You're right, Maggie. We never meant to hurt you. Intentions don't erase consequences. Margaret said gently, I'm not angry anymore, I just need change. And so, they did. That afternoon, Margaret led them to the kitchen whiteboard and together they wrote out a new chore distribution chart, cleaning, cooking, bills, even gardening, all equally shared. Walter chuckled awkwardly. I've never used a vacuum cleaner before. Margaret smiled. Then I'll teach you, Dad. For the first time, laughter returned to the house, light, fragile, but real. Months later, a new balance. By April, spring sunlight filled Willow Creek again. Margaret now lived in her own small apartment, a 20-minute walk from her parents' home. She still worked at the accounting firm, but her weekends were hers alone. She took watercolor classes, volunteered at a community center, and, perhaps most importantly, had started to feel genuine peace. Sunday dinners had become a family tradition. Everyone brought something, Lisa dessert, Walter wine, Eleanor flowers. As they gathered at Margaret's apartment, laughter filled the room again, but this time, the balance had shifted. They no longer treated her as the family caretaker, but as an equal, independent woman. Later that night, as Margaret stood by her window, she looked at the tulips her mother had brought from the garden. They glowed softly in the lamplight, petals opening toward the sun. Margaret smiled. Her life, too, was finally beginning to bloom. A quiet reclamation, a quiet breath escaped Margaret's lips as she gazed out the hotel window, watching the muted lights of Philadelphia blink against the pale dawn. Steam rose from the mug of coffee cupped between her hands, curling like a thought she couldn't quite catch. She had grown used to this silence, the kind that didn't demand anything of her. Her phone vibrated again. She hesitated, then answered. It's about the party, isn't it? She said softly, her tone steady but tired. Yes, but not just that, came Eleanor's voice, sharp yet trembling. We're worried about the house, and about you too. Margaret's lips curved in a bitter half-smile. Really? When I disappeared, wasn't your first concern not about me, but about the housework? There was silence on the other end, not the guilty kind, more like confusion, as if her mother couldn't quite process the accusation. Maggie, please. This time it was Walter's voice, low and coaxing. Come back home. Nothing works without you. Margaret closed her eyes. The words hit her like an old bruise, familiar, dull, but still tender. For so long, nothing works without you had sounded like love. Now, it sounded like a chain. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. When she hung up, she didn't cry. She simply stared at the ceiling, feeling the stillness of the room press against her chest. For the first time in her life, she was allowed to think about what she wanted. That freedom was both thrilling and terrifying. The next morning dawned gray and quiet. Margaret sat by the wide hotel window, a blanket draped around her shoulders. The city stretched before her, tiny cars, hurried strangers, lives intersecting without touching. She took another sip of coffee and whispered to the glass. For 38 years, I didn't know how to live for myself. The words felt strange, like trying on a dress she'd never had the courage to buy. On the small desk beside her, a notebook lay open, filled with pages of scattered thoughts, dreams, lists, questions. Somewhere between writing and reflection, Margaret had rediscovered her own handwriting, careful, elegant, distinctly hers. The day before, she had met Sarah Fisher, a psychologist who had struck up a conversation in a cafe after noticing Margaret sketching aimlessly on a napkin. Sarah's warmth had been disarming, her voice calm and measured. "You've spent your life carrying other people's peace," Sarah had said, "but peace carried for others is never your own." Those words had followed her back to the hotel, lingering like music. Now, as sunlight broke through the clouds, Margaret reached for her laptop. Her fingers trembled slightly as she began to type. "Dear Mom and Dad. For a long time, I found joy in serving our family, but the Christmas incident showed me clearly how I am seen and valued in this home. I will come back to help prepare for the New Year's party, but only under these conditions. I am not a maid. I wish to be treated equally as a daughter. Household chores should be shared by everyone. My time and effort have value, and that must be respected. My life choices and successes deserve the same celebration as Lisa's. If these conditions are not acceptable, I will continue on my own path. With love, Margaret." When she hit send, her heart pounded, not from fear, but from liberation. It was the first act of defiance she'd ever committed without guilt. The reply came 30 minutes later. "Maggie, please come back immediately. We accept any conditions. The house doesn't function without you. With love." Margaret exhaled a long breath. They still don't get it, she thought, folding her clothes neatly into her suitcase. But it didn't matter, not yet. Change always began with misunderstanding. When she stood before her family's door 2 days later, the air felt heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The brass doorknob was cool against her palm. The wreath had wilted. Inside, the familiar chaos greeted her, newspapers spilling over the table, half-empty mugs, faint traces of pine and dust. The once glorious Christmas tree sagged in the corner like an exhausted guest who had stayed too long. Maggie, Eleanor appeared from the kitchen, apron smeared with flour, eyes wide. She rushed forward, arms open, but Margaret stepped back. "Mom, Dad," she said firmly, "we need to talk." Eleanor froze. Walter, who had appeared behind her, frowned slightly, half worried, half defensive. They sat at the dining table, the same one where Margaret had spent years silently clearing other people's plates. "The things I wrote in my email," she began slowly, "aren't requests, they're boundaries." "Maggie, we were just," Walter started, but she raised a hand. "For 38 years, I've done everything I could to keep this family running," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. "But in all that time, I lost myself, my needs, my dreams, buried under convenience and expectation." Eleanor's eyes shimmered. "We never meant to." "Intentions don't erase impact," Margaret interrupted gently. "At Christmas, Lisa got a vacation to Bali and applause. I got a to-do list. That's not equality. That's invisible labor disguised as love." The silence that followed was different this time, heavier, more aware. Walter sighed. "What do you want from us, Maggie?" "For the first time, equality," she said simply. "We'll divide the housework. Everyone participates. And from now on, respect isn't optional, it's mutual." They didn't argue, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of exhaustion, but for the first time, they listened. That afternoon, a whiteboard appeared in the kitchen, its surface filling with neatly drawn columns: cleaning, groceries, cooking, laundry, bills. The markers squeaked as Margaret wrote each name. When she handed her father the vacuum cleaner, he looked at it like a foreign object. "It's not rocket science, Dad," she teased softly. "Just don't suck up the curtains." Eleanor laughed, awkwardly at first, then genuinely. For the first time in years, laughter didn't feel one-sided. By evening, something subtle had shifted. The house still looked imperfect, crumbs on the counter, mismatched decorations, but it was alive again. That night, Lisa called from Bali. Her voice was cheerful. carefree. Maggie, you're back. I'll be home in 2 days, don't start the party without me. Margaret smiled faintly. We'll wait, but when you're back, we'll need to talk. Lisa frowned. Is something wrong? Not wrong, Margaret said, just different. When the call ended, Margaret sat by her window, staring at the stars beyond the frosty glass. The world outside was quiet, but inside her, something new stirred, an anchor of peace, faint but steady. Knowing your worth, she whispered, that's the beginning of everything. 4 months later. Spring had softened the chill of Willow Creek. Margaret's apartment glowed with afternoon sunlight, the air warm with the scent of roasted garlic and thyme. She moved through the kitchen gracefully, her apron dusted with flour, a watercolor of tulips drying on the counter nearby. She had signed a lease 2 months after the new year, not far, just a 20-minute walk from her parents' home, close enough to stay connected, far enough to breathe. Sunday dinners had become a family ritual, but this time, they came to her. When the doorbell rang, she wiped her hands and opened the door. Something smells divine, Eleanor said, holding a bouquet of freshly picked tulips, first from the garden this season. Walter lifted a bottle of wine, imported. I thought we'd celebrate. Lisa followed with a bright smile and a box of pastries. Don't worry, I actually helped choose them this time. Margaret laughed. Come in, everyone. The apartment was small but warm, soft lighting, watercolor paintings, the faint hum of jazz from a speaker. Dinner was lively. They talked, teased, listened. Walter confessed to burning a pot roast the previous week. Eleanor spoke of her volunteer work. Lisa beamed about her fashion show in New York, and invited Margaret to attend. I'd love to go, Margaret said sincerely. Thank you for asking. Later, on the balcony, the two sisters watched the fading sunset. I owe you an apology, Lisa said quietly. For years, I acted like your time didn't matter. I thought the way things were was normal. Margaret turned toward her, smiling gently. It wasn't just you. We all played our parts. The difference is, we're changing them now. Lisa nodded. You should know, the new line I'm designing? It's called Balance. Margaret laughed softly. Then we're both learning about balance, in our own ways. Inside, their parents talked in low voices. She's happier now, Eleanor whispered. Walter nodded. So are we. As the evening ended, Eleanor hugged Margaret tightly at the door. Thank you, she whispered. You saved our family. Margaret closed the door behind them, turning to face the quiet apartment. The tulips from her mother caught the last light of dusk, glowing faintly on the windowsill. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, finally hers. She smiled, whispering to herself, like flowers in spring, I've finally begun to bloom.